There's a version of you that exists only in your head. It talks to your boss before you've even walked into the meeting. It argues with your ex, years after the relationship ended, and somehow still loses. It apologizes to people who never asked for an apology, and stands up to people who are never actually cruel to begin with. You've probably caught yourself doing this in the shower, or driving, or lying in bed at 1 a.m. a conversation that hasn't happened yet, playing out scene by scene, or one that already happened, running again, except this time you say the thing you didn't say. This time you win. Most people call this overthinking, a bad habit, something to laugh about. But what if it isn't a habit at all? What if it's a strategy, one your mind built a long time ago, for a reason it never explained to you? The easiest explanation is that these people are simply anxious, nervous types, running worst-case scenarios because their brains default to fear. And sometimes that's part of it. Anxiety does love a script. It wants to prepare for every version of pain before it arrives. But anxiety alone doesn't explain why the rehearsal keeps happening even after the moment is safely over. It doesn't explain why someone can replay a 5-minute conversation for 5 years. If this were only about fear of the future, the fear should end the moment the future becomes the past. It doesn't. So there's something else going on, something less about prediction and more about control. Picture someone getting ready to ask their landlord for a repair. Before they pick up the phone, they've already had the conversation 4 times. They know their opening line. They know how they'll respond if the landlord pushes back. They know their tone, their pacing, even the silence they'll leave after making their point. By the time they actually make the call, they're not having a conversation anymore. They're performing one they've already written. Psychologists sometimes describe this tendency through the lens of anticipatory coping, trying to mentally solve a stressful situation before it exists, so that when it does exist, it feels less dangerous. On the surface, it looks like preparation. Underneath, it's often something closer to self-protection. If you can predict how it goes, you can control how much it hurts. But here's where it gets more uncomfortable, because rehearsing isn't only about the future. A huge amount of this mental scripting happens after the fact, replaying an argument that already ended, revising your own lines like a director unhappy with the first cut. This is where rumination enters the picture. Not simple reflection, but a looping, repetitive kind of thinking that keeps returning to the same unresolved moment. Research on rumination has linked it to difficulty regulating emotion. The mind keeps circling because something about the moment still feels unfinished. Not factually unfinished, emotionally unfinished. And that's the part most people miss. The rehearsal ain't really about the conversation. It's about a feeling that got left in your chest and never got to leave. Think about the version of you that finally tells someone off in the shower 3 days after they hurt your feelings, and you never said a word out loud. You weren't rehearsing for a future conversation. You were trying to retroactively give yourself the power you didn't feel in the original moment. This is where the psychology quietly shifts from anxiety to something closer to identity. Somewhere along the way, many people who do this learned that expressing themselves in real time was risky. Maybe it got them dismissed, maybe it got them punished, mocked, or simply unheard. So the nervous system adapted. It built a private stage where you could always say the right thing, always land the perfect response, always be understood, because out there, in real conversations, that safety was never guaranteed. In other words, the rehearsal isn't a flaw in your personality. It's a form of armor built by someone who once needed one. But armor has a cost, and this is where the paradox reveals itself. The people who rehearse the most are often the ones who care the most about being understood. They're not indifferent to connection, they're desperately protective of it. And yet, the very habit meant to protect that connection can quietly pull them out of it, because when you're deep in an imagined conversation, you're not actually talking to the person in front of you. You're talking to a version of them that exists only in your memory or your fear, a character built from old wounds, old expectations, old outcomes. Real people rarely follow the script, and when they don't, it doesn't feel like a normal surprise. It can feel like a small betrayal. Even though the only person who wrote the original lines was you, there's a strange loneliness hidden inside all this rehearsal. You can spend hours preparing to be honest with someone and still never say the real thing, because the version in your head already said it for you, and some part of your brain quietly marks the conversation as complete. The need gets simulated instead of met. Over time, this pattern can start to cost something bigger than a single conversation. It can quietly convince you that your real voice isn't enough, that only the rehearsed one is safe to use. People who do this for years sometimes describe feeling like two different selves. The confident one who exists in imagined arguments, and the quieter one who shows up in real rooms, saying less than they meant to. And maybe that's the real ache underneath all of this. Not indecision, not anxiety, exactly, but grief, for every time you needed to be heard and weren't, and had to build somewhere private to finally say it. Which brings the question back to where it started. But change. This was never really about conversations you haven't had. It was about conversations you never fully got to finish, with a parent, a friend, a version of yourself from years ago. The rehearsal ain't rehearsal at all. It's an old unmet need, still looking for a room to be spoken in. Maybe the goal isn't to stop rehearsing entirely. Maybe it's to notice when the version of you inside your head has grown more articulate, more confident, more honest than the version that exists in daylight, and to slowly, carefully, start inviting that voice outside, because somewhere between the imagined conversation and the real one, there's a version of you still waiting to be heard by someone who isn't only you.